I prefer.
Yeah, good morning, Heinz.
Good morning.
Yeah, we're here today to talk about a quite interesting topic, which is Web 3.0 and how that can be scaled in business and industry. So
Yeah,
perhaps
I guess we take it a bit like DLT360 over coffee style. So this is
exactly. So Heinz, if you quickly introduce yourself and then I take the honors afterwards.
yeah. So my fairly long history started as a student in the early days of digitization, went all the way over digitalization, all the way over digital transformation in automation companies, in telecom companies, and in machine building, and in a large global end user where I was responsible for the global digital transformation. There is also where I got first in touch with blockchain very early in, I would say 2015-ish. So
That's actually quite early, considering that 2017 seemed to have been the year where at least kind of a lot of things happened
right.
with a number of ICOs and so on. Yeah, perhaps quickly to myself. Yeah, I'm working currently for quite a while actually, and in an international medtech company. Have been in a number of different roles, being responsible for the IT department on a manufacturing side, then moved on into a more architectural, strategic function, being responsible for certain topics in the regional setup of this organization, and currently working in the cybersecurity space. So also similar to you, quite a breadth of different roles and topics, but always related to effectively in a very industrial, big
So we
global
can
player.
claim we have one leg in the Web3 world and the other, at least one other leg in the business and industry deep
I think
insight perspective.
I think we can say that. So perhaps kind of like the first topic which we should talk about is so where are we with Web3? What is the current status? What's your view on that?
Yeah, since I was actually driving digital transformation in a very large global company and trying as an innovator to introduce blockchain fairly early, I noticed, of course, there are early enthusiastic experiments where they are mainly based on private permission blockchains of some, let's say, large vendors promoting this approach already in the kind you mentioned that 2017, 18 was one of those times. And then there were the contrary. There were these kind of shiny sparks, these luxury consumer brands or the say consumer retention activities when NFTs popped up. This was actually, but in the big picture, in my stomach feeling was it's a lot of overpromising and a lot of under-delivering, as so typical for radical innovations also before blockchain. So this is not untypical at all.
And I think this is something which we have to recognize. I was reading an interesting book called Web3 Marketing, which was kind of like a reflection. And when you read the first few pages, there are actually two major adoption areas. The one is decentralized finance, DeFi, which was pretty much the first when smart contracts kind of became available on Ethereum. And then the second one is actually kind of like this boom of everything in NFT without a real use case behind that. And that's kind of where we stand at this moment in time.
Yeah,
So
from corporate perspective, I think one of the big challenges is that a lot of the infrastructure, the fabric in society and economy is not yet really there. So from identities to the legal and business frameworks, a lot of regulations. So that keeps it so far actually to a kind of a playground of some innovators and kept it from really scaling.
interesting that you mentioned effectively regulations. I mean, I looked the other day at I think it was a video, which was looking at the situation how it develops at the moment in Dubai. Yeah, kind of the next Cardano summit is going to be in Dubai again. and Dubai seems to kind of tries to head this problem with regulation off by actually having a regulation framework set in stone, which gives, and that was kind of the key message, security to move forward. Yeah, so you know from a regulatory perspective what you can expect, and you know the boundaries, and that enables in a number of cases. I think this is one of the elements which also contributes, mainly also in the business and industry area, that there is this uncertainty about the regulatory side of things.
Absolutely. I forgot to mention, you know that, Torsten, I'm just completing a master thesis and my topic is EU digital identity. Is it a blessing or is it a threat for business and industry? So there is a lot of stuff actually also happening in the European Union where you can be skeptical, but also some of these so-called next generation internet initiatives are fairly interesting. So there could be some helpful momentum, but also, of course, always with regulation, it's can also be seen critical. But it's not the first time. You are too young, Torsten, but I remember, what is it now, in 30 years ago, 1994-ish, when I was living in Austria these days, and the same, I think, was true in Germany, where you were probably at this time. The Telephone and Telegraph Ministry was trying to, let's say, regulate and, yeah, to some extent, control the internet. So,
and I think that is perhaps kind of taking us to the next question, which kind of like we might want to discuss. So clearly, blockchain technology is a radical innovation. Kind of when you read the paper from when Bitcoin in itself was kind of conceptualized, the concept in itself might have been in the brewing, but kind of what came out of that one is actually quite a fundamental shift, and it is using technology in itself in an ingenious way. But the question is now kind of like, what is blocking the adoption of innovation? Why isn't this going faster?
That's a good point. But you know, when I look back in my career, I had this feeling. It's kind of a déjà vu moment. So when I was a teenager, I came with automation and was selling that to mechanical engineers. When I was a startup entrepreneur in the 80s, it was about PC-based technologies selling to mainframe people. And you know yourself, when then mobile communication and cloud came, I think you were very, very into this topic. How difficult it was in the beginning to convince server center promoters in companies to go into cloud architectures?
I can remember when kind of like I was working at that moment in time as an enterprise architect, and we had obviously the problem, and I was, as I mentioned before, the IT manager for a manufacturing site. We still had to rack up servers. We still had to kind of put them in a rack, order them, rack them up, install operating systems. So it took weeks to get effectively a project running. Now it's effectively on the press of a button. Within 2 minutes, you spin up a virtual machine somewhere in the data center of your choice. And I remember when the first time we kind of started to touch cloud technology, the defending position was that cannot work, and it's for sure not secure. And then you saw effectively this kind of like how shall I say that, tipping point moment where by a sudden technology was adapted in a fast pace. Cloud services were cloud first. By a sudden, everything didn't consider the server and the rack anymore. And a lot of big companies, also the one I've been working for, kind of got rid of their own server, own data centers, and kind of shifted a lot of the technology effectively to the service
There
providers.
you're touching a key point to us. You're always, as innovator, you're always coming with your beautiful radical ideas and are confronting actually people that grew up and established their positions in the previous technology wave. So now we are approaching, we're coming with Web3 with some really good value propositions, I think, but we are talking to a buying center, if I may call it that way, of people who are struggling with their Web2 and their cloud security, their cloud, let's say, their fairly complex architectures. So they are not really waiting for Web3 to knock on the door, isn't it?
Yeah, it looks like this, and it looks to be like that blockchain kind of, whilst it had quite a momentum in 2017, where perhaps the technology was not yet ready, kind of for an adoption in the context of business and industry. There were a lot of cases where there was a lot of over-promising and then heavily under-delivering. I remembered the first time when kind of I heard about smart contracts, and I couldn't even get this concept into my head. How can it work, and how would that actually be beneficial? So you had to see effectively the first adoption use cases in the DeFi space. So yeah, kind of like buying center is an interesting topic. So what do you think should the approach be? Um, is it overselling the technology and under solving the problem?
So what we are doing as a first step is DLT360, and I want to, let's say, take this starting point with the buying center. First of all, I think it's about identifying, let me call it, killer applications. So where everyone without much effort understands that really helps my daily business operation. There is value behind, and that's not simply a talk about NFT or DeFi. That needs to go deeply into the understanding of supply chains and where actually real pain points are in today's digital transformation. And that's so this kind of reddish upper front, we are trying now to identify. The goal is, what is it, Torsten, 5 to 10 in the beginning, really attractive applications which are deep down blockchain based, but we are not, first of all, knocking on the door and say, guys, we sell you blockchain. We come with value propositions.
So can we go a little bit deeper on that one? Perhaps elaborate it on one or two examples. Perhaps we pick the first one, this the Kanban one. So what's the idea behind that one, and why is blockchain a technology which might help, and what actually is the problem which is solved?
Yeah, I can
Independently
just,
from the
let's say, pull it
technology.
out of my personal experience. I was in about 15 years supplying, representing automation suppliers, selling to machine building companies. And one of the big challenges is always the planning of the quantities along interlinked supply chains. So Kanban is a pull principle. So from the speed you are selling machines as a machine builder, your sub-suppliers are, so to say, upstream getting pull signals. So you can actually, the whole supply chain is adjusted as a complete interlinked chain of demand and supply. So Kanban is a very, very beneficial principle, simplifying all the purchasing, all the let's say, otherwise very complex demand planning. So it's a principle that industry is trying to establish since 20 years, but other than automotive, it's not really been taking off. I guess you have your own experience with it.
And I think that's the background, isn't it? It was Toyota who kind of invented this one as part of their lean principles, which have been adopted in a number of industries in different shades and forms. And, excuse me, to level out the supply chain and to have material available when it is needed without overstocking, without over committing capital effectively to buy stuff was kind of like the innovative principle, and the underlying principle of having effectively a cycle of signals which says, okay, I need something or I consumed something, send me more, is actually quite simple. And the adoption in itself is not at this moment in time tied to blockchain technology as an enabler as such. Kanban has been used for quite a while. So
Yes.
what is the spin now from our side to make it kind of the next step in the usage? I think the
Yeah.
main challenge which we have there is that um, a lot of companies would love to implement this method, but it comes with a hefty price, which is probably a little bit lightened with cloud services, but still there. Like I have to have a license. Have to give someone access to my systems. By a sudden, I have risks and concerns in the cybersecurity space I have to deal with.
Right.
I cannot settle values through the Kanban system directly. I need another system to do that. So,
And Thorsten, one more point. When I was in the role of a sub-supplier, you are confronted at every larger customer, and you hopefully have many large customers, has a different system. So you, as a sub-supplier, you need to adjust to a complex world of let's say, enterprise architectures and IT infrastructures of your actually large customers who ask you to Kanban supply. It's a mission impossible.
so the idea which we have with this project is actually bring it on to a trustless blockchain, um, do the signaling there, interface with relevant systems, or make it easy accessible through a classical DApp application as a front end, which then gives the ability to integrate from big to small customers in the supply chain game, and take the complexities out, which you just mentioned.
Right. The second application is TwinShare. That's touching a deep pain point about managing and accessing components. This can be sensors, this can be machines out in the world, the digital twins of components and equipment that everyone wants to access, but the factories where this thing is actually standing are super afraid to open up to the upstream vendors out of cybersecurity reasons. So there is a lot of issues at the moment where the use of blockchain could introduce some interesting answers.
So that plays in the space of decentralized identities, so-called DITs.
Yes, that's one thing. It plays into the management of encryption certificates, which is very difficult at the moment. So, and it also plays into the, let's say, distribution, who has access to which data, because you can imagine a machine standing at Coca-Cola, just to name one company. Coca-Cola does not want the machine builder to retrieve data about the production volume. And the machine builder doesn't want Coca-Cola to get data about the inner well-being of the machine. So that's can be handled with, let's say, segmented encryption, but that's today almost impossible to handle.
But Heinz, can't you just use a cloud service provider like Microsoft to do that for you? They have all these access management solutions in place, and easy peasy, isn't it? You
Easy
just give
peasy,
it to
yes.
them, and
Yeah,
then
if you look at the management, now this started about 5 to 7 years ago, where the let's say, the whole identity and access management, where you need to include upstream suppliers, where you need to include service personnel, not your own people, but let's say this complex hodgepodge of suppliers and even customers. that makes the use of blockchain really attractive.
Interesting enough, obviously kind of Microsoft is one of the big players with their identity solution. The challenge there obviously is the one which you mentioned and which falls a little bit to the side. There is a risk related to that one from a cybersecurity perspective. Identities get compromised, and big providers of identity solutions get compromised too.
Right.
So even Microsoft in itself is not protected against that. They had a recent case, and that makes effectively companies wonder also how can they solve this problem which is coming out of the cybersecurity space.
Audit chair, Thorsten, I think you are the more skilled one to say a couple of words.
Yeah, let me quickly kind of explain the concept and the underlying problem. And it kind of was mentioned before already. How can I trust someone else? And the way industry and business is trying to solve that is, well, let's get an independent party, do an assessment or an audit on the company. I get a certificate that I passed the criterias which are outlined in an international standard, and that I do what I should do so that my customer can be reassured that I don't have to, that he doesn't have to look at the way I do things himself. The main challenge which is coming out of that one is that it's getting accelerated at the moment also through regulators. They want to see more and more evidence that things are done in an appropriate way. The European Union is in that context tailblazing with a number of regulations. Just to name one, there is one which is related to critical infrastructure and NIS2, but there are others. And the challenge which comes out of that one is I have to do a lot more audits than I had to do in the past. And it doesn't just affect myself, it also affects my supply chain. In theory, I have to assure that on both ends, on the customer side and on the supplier side, and within my own organization, everything is okay. The challenge is there are not enough resources available and they're not really shared. So aside of the fact that there are not enough people to do these assurance activities who are qualified to do that, there is also the challenge that the same activity is performed again and again and again.
Right.
Against certain companies. So audit share in itself is having a similar idea, like twin share, to kind of like make it accessible wherever it needs to be accessible and share resources in a most economical way. So in a nutshell, I do an audit. I share these audit results with the permission of the ODT, with the relevant people who need to know or who should know about that. And therefore, I reduce the number of redundancies in this whole system.
So can be
That's
a
the one.
big game changer in the big picture. A lot of effort, which is redundant, can be actually saved.
Yes. And the second thing is obviously people have to find each other who can do an audit, who did an audit. It's kind of like normally a common area for a marketplace. Currently, there is not really a marketplace for audit resources, aka auditors and or audit results. Yeah, so even if I would want to find it, currently it's very decentralized. If I need an audit result of a supplier, I have to go to the supplier. The supplier will have to send it to me in a secure way. And I do that with every single supplier, which becomes a very laborious activity. So instead of having it available in an easy way, in a decentralized way, but centralistic in the sense of accessibility, I have to more or less kind of go to every single supplier again and again, and that's not an activity of one or two. That normally goes in the hundreds or thousands of contacts, which I have to maintain.
So we got the concept funded in Fund 11. Now for Fund 12, Cardano Fund 12, we want to actually go deeper into the MVP development. And the last one is actually an example where, looking at many larger global companies, there is a big, how should I call it, appetite to get bottom-up opinions, bottom-up engagement. But it's very, very difficult nowadays to kind of, if you think about idea management, innovation, pipeline management, people are scared still in many parts of the world to contribute their creativity. And so we want to examine DAOs as a principle within the corporate world, but Thorsten, DAOs in the corporate world needs some very specific fine-tunings, isn't it?
It does. So on the one hand side, a DAO is kind of like a structure which is actually quite new, which doesn't form a long legal entities necessarily. It's more based on an activity rather than a legal structure. And therefore it leans itself very much to the ability to kind of extend beyond the legal boundaries of an organization. So there is an appetite, for example, to include customers in
Absolutely.
these activities, or there is an appetite to include suppliers in these activities. But on the other side, you don't want to be open to everyone. You just want to more or less kind of share things with those bespoke groups. You might even want to fragment certain elements of that one. Your customers shouldn't necessarily know where your suppliers are. Your suppliers shouldn't necessarily know who your customers are. So there is this loosely coupled intention to work together to solve certain problems or to address certain questions and get an outside view and have a certain element of joint effort in
Right.
it. But on the other side, you don't want to be kind of open to everyone. And the current DAO concept is pretty much based on, yeah, just put it out in the wild. Someone will pick it up and we're going to compensate you in a certain form for that. That doesn't, at the end of the day, meet the requirements of business and industry, which want this information on the one hand side, who want this collaboration on the one hand side, but on the other side, want to also protect their intellectual property, want to protect effectively certain trade secrets and so on.
So this is where a lot of those interesting layer 2, layer 3 solutions, which are now luckily coming up, also play a role, and to not be an open book to everyone, to have segmented confidentiality in place. That's really important for this.
And that's kind of a new concept, which is actually kind of elevating the underpinning concept of DAOs to another level and another level of adoption in itself. So I'm thinking in this context about collaboration on an ecosystem level with DAO-like structures, but on the other side, conserving secrets and privacy in this context.
These applications, Thorsten, we identified as our goal is to have kind of 10 to 20 such applications in the long run, which are really deeply investigated, which are really producing, let's say, business value without any doubts. But now, how do we get from the idea? I'm moving one step further. How do we get from the concept to a really, let's say, practically tested and also, let's say, where expert opinions from really practitioners come in. So the goal is to activate, I need to say reactivate, because what I'm now describing, the Smart Industry Forum, was an entity that was active from 2015 to 2020. It was a digital transformation expert community that was in that time tackling a lot of those topics, Thorsten, that we said about, let's say, how to utilize cloud computing, a lot was about cybersecurity. many
I
of
think
those early experiments, like let's say the, um, the early internet platforms of GE, for example, Predix or Siemens MindSphere, they were kind of Facebooks for industry, but they were, in my opinion, failing because industry needs much more security, much more confidentiality, and you cannot simply act in the way as the social media companies are doing with consumers. So this was a very active group of people with also very interesting people involved. So from, let's say, companies, from well-known companies like Volvo, IKEA, Alfa Laval. I myself was acting as founding director here for some years, and I was in this session, I was leading digital transformation at a Tetra Laval company. And so it was a mix of visionaries and really experts. And this forum we want to reactivate for exposing our concepts to real world experts. And when we then go to MVP and to a blueprint, to have this really let's say hardened by the needs of the real world. And that's, Torsten, I think you are also very much into the understanding that just a good idea is only a small percentage of the success factors.
I think the fundamental in this context is what are the steps for an idea to become an innovation. So first of all, the idea in itself has to solve a real world problem. An idea which is just kind of like a nice to have will lack sooner or later the adoption. And we can see that a little bit in the blockchain space at the moment. It is fascinating from a technology perspective, and a lot of people who are driving innovation from a technical perspective forward try to solve a technology problem. It's effectively kind of what can I do with this blockchain, but that in itself doesn't necessarily mean that it solves a real world problem. So identifying these problems in a common way and do that very, very early and do that with a group of experts who more or less can share and feel the same pain is a good starting point. It's also a good sounding board to check whether what you're trying to do is actually going to work.
The
This
hard thing, Torsten, if I may jump in here, is that you can only talk to these experts if you have these 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 really attractive applications. Just with vague ideas, oh, I'm here with Web3 and blockchain, they don't even talk to you.
Yeah, and these applications in itself have to address easily understandable problem spaces. So as we alluded before, all of these kind of are driven effectively to drive a real world problem in the first place. Nevertheless, there might be more problems which haven't been undetected. And to drive effectively this discovery forward, there are actually two elements. The one you mentioned already, which is I need real world applications. I need showcases to make it transparent what actually the solution to the problem could be. The way we are trying to do that is with the business development framework. This is actually two-folded. On the one hand side, it will embed the applications, which you can see here in red, and there will be many more, and we are very, very open also to kind of take further applications on board from the partner network, which we are also trying to build right now. So we are looking very proactively in the space, what is at that moment developed, and try to take this also in to reflect against the experts from industry, whether that is really solving, or business, which is really whether it's really solving a problem. So this business development framework has the showcase element to it, and we are hoping very heavily that we can onboard relevant open source applications into this framework. But the second thing is you have to understand almost like connecting an electric car with a power grid, how to bring this application into the context of the organization. And we do that by using an, again, open source, well-established framework. We mentioned that in previous videos before, which is called TOGAF, the Open Group Architectural Framework, which is well known in industry, big organizations, and map effectively these applications to these frameworks to give an organization an accelerated start in experimenting and in adoption. And the middle layer, if I may quickly kind of cover this off on that side, is actually the glue between this development framework and the expertise which is existing in industries and in business, which is there is a knowledge gap which has to be filled. We are very aware of that, and that was actually the starting point of funding, from funding round 6 up to funding round 9, 8, where we started to develop effectively this knowledge describing blockchain technologies and terminology in an easy, understandable way, in a navigatable way, so that people can do deep dives and effectively kind of build up the knowledge to close the gap between the problem space, which they very well understand, and then this innovative technology, which is a distributed ledger technology with all these different elements, which by a sudden you have to understand to lift the full potential on that one.
Right. So what we are hoping now with Fund 12 is that the Cardano Catalyst community allows us to continue this I would say, well grounded approach. It's not a fast approach, so it has nothing to do with noisy PR and marketing. It kind of infiltrates business and industry from a lot of different angles. But the key thing, Thorsten, as you mentioned, is to get let's say, product market fit undoubtedly in place, because without that, nothing will fly.
And I think that's also kind of one of the elements which we are kind of trying to bring in here. We deliberately didn't start building a technical solution on the blockchain, but effectively use this new introduced concept phase from Project Catalyst to really start to evaluate, is there really a problem, underlying problem? Is there a product market fit, and have then these conversations effectively with the context in industry and in business to get the verification of, yep, there is actually a problem to be solved. There is a market, and ultimately kind of like that then is leading to the adoption in the market, meaning kind of like it becomes self-sustainable, it becomes a viable business model in itself. And it is creating actually adoption of the technology as such, meaning kind of we see transaction volume increasing on Cardano.
So I guess this was our round trip, DLT360 over coffee, to explain what we are actually doing, how we are approaching this ambition to scale Web3, but specifically also Cardano in business and industry. So I can just warmly ask Cardano Catalyst community to support us in the Fund 12 voting.